Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Great. So my name is Tahir Paduska, and
I'm Lynette Rail.
We're from Cornell University. We both work at the libraries there, and we're here to talk about a project that we worked on for the past few years that is built using Hyrax, and wanted to share some of our experiences both working in the community as well as the software that Hyrax is, and talk about some of the customizations and changes we made in the past few years to improve the app. So just a brief introduction on the project. It's called USDA ESMIS for short. Essentially, it stands for Economics, Statistics, and Market Information System, which is essentially an archive for a lot of the publications and files that the 5 agencies that we partner with produce. And historically, it has been a long-term partnership that started somewhere in the 90s. And the website has gone through multiple versions and renderings. And the current website is actually Spring Framework Java application that over time has grown to be somewhat unmaintainable. And we decided to use Hyrax for developing the new site. We also have a subscription and email notification service that people can log in, have an account, and subscribe to a publication. Essentially, that's high-level metadata, and every so often, depending on the frequency of the publication, the agencies will upload the data files, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, or whatnot, and people will get email notifications about that. In our current system, we have around 60,000 subscribers, and roughly email volume right now is around 1 million emails per month. So as I said, we're both from Cornell University. I was trying to find pictures of our nice, beautiful campus, and then this time of the year. You were?
Pumpkin?
The pumpkin.
The pumpkin, you were
And
there.
the cones and-
Yeah, so this time of the year, 21 years back, I kept on finding these pictures, and I was like, oh, of course, it's the time of the year. Someone put a pumpkin 21 years back on the tower. And you can Google it, by the way. So it was brought down the year later. It stayed there through the winter and caused a lot of media hype and whatnot. So this is the project team. Mary Hawks, director of Man Library. Darcy is our project manager. I am a tech lead, but also a web developer on the project. Kevin Kidwell is a designer. John Ferreira has been with us for a long time, and he was the original developer of the ESMIS that we have been using for a while. Lynette Rail has been kind of our go-to person for all needs required to Hyrax Samvera, and she kind of jumps in and out of working with the project or working with the community. We have a couple of librarians that work with us on this project and also act as a liaison to the USDA agencies, Ashley Shea and Selena Bryant, and Greg Delisle and Chris Manley are our DevOps folks. Greg has been with us, I think, for a few months now. He was hired during fall. So just an overview of the PCDM model that we use for the project in Hyrax. We have the partner agencies. As I told you, those are the people that upload their publications and releases to the system. One of the agencies is pretty big, and they have multiple divisions, and they wanted to have a sub-collection in there. So we kind of modified that and use agency and division as like collection, nested collection. Publications and releases we modeled as works. So publications are the broad level metadata placeholder that doesn't change. There's no files associated with it, but those are where every so often, weekly, monthly, daily, the agencies will upload a file as a release. So we call that nested work or a child work in this system. And then the release files are wrapped around in file sets in the system. Brief intro about the infrastructure and workflow. we kind of jumped into the AWS world with this project and started using Elastic Beanstalk, EC2 and whatnot, and over the period of time added some more technologies from AWS to the project. But this is kind of an overview of the Rails app is using Elastic Beanstalk that in production we auto-scale it based on the load. EC2 for Solar and Fedora, we have it on one big box right now. We might cluster it in the future. And then we use S3 buckets for file uploads. We do store files outside Fedora and point to the S3 buckets for there, and I can talk about that in a bit. And then we put a CloudFront on the S3 bucket. So most of the downloads links that are actually on the site are direct downloads from the S3 through the CloudFront. So that kind of takes some load off of our website because we get hit hard on certain times of the year based on the. These are just some graphs. Everyone likes graphs. I thought I would throw some graphs. You can figure out what they are, or we can talk about it later when we have time. There's some good lines here. Some go up, some go down, some stay flat, whatnot. So some customizations that, as I said, I would like to share with the community. One of the bigger ones was how do we model and code the agencies and divisions, because there's the whole hierarchy in there and nesting. We started with using admin sets, and Lynette will talk more about this. And then eventually ended up using collection extensions, thanks to our work in Samvera and Hyrax. We did a lot of user testing and modified some of the views in Hyrax and added some custom date range filters, facets, and modified some of the forms as well. I already talked about the file storage in S3. We did modify some of the code and created an API, both a read and a write API. And I can talk about that in a little bit more. And then for subscription email, right now, as I was saying, our current system is using a homegrown email system, which has gotten really complicated, and it's not our area of expertise to maintain it. And we get a lot of complaints and spam and stuff like that. So we looked at other options, and Mailgun seemed to be the best fit for our case. And so we use Mailgun for this project for sending emails, and also creating mailing lists for subscriptions and notifications and stuff like that, and some work on improving the performance of uploading files to the system. So Lynette will talk about the work she did on agencies and divisions.
So our basic requirement is that we needed to have divisions inside agencies. And so right away that comes up with the idea of nesting. When we started, we were on Hyrax 2.0 and there was no nesting. And so our initial take was, can we do some kind of customization of admin sets in order to make it simulate nesting? And so I basically threw in another metadata field that would do what type is it? Is it a division? Is it an agency? And then I would also throw in a field that would let me do a parent ID. So if the parent ID had a value, it was a division because it had a parent. And if it didn't have a value, it would be an agency. And of course, that right there, that seems pretty simple. But of course, the devil is in the details because there were many, many challenges beyond that. So we also then from that point needed to do all sorts of customizations. Everywhere the label admin set showed up, we had to change that label to either agency or division by looking at this unit type and seeing what it was. We had to change the edit forms. We had to change to have different metadata based on whether it's an agency or division. We had to create search builders so that it would only return agencies or only return divisions associated with a particular agency. And there were many others. So that was just the sort of the tip of it. And I got partway through it and it became more and more evident that this is like really ugly. This is not what we want to do. So time for plan B. So I said, well, there are collections. We could leverage the user collections that already exist. Maybe we could do it there. And just a brief look at that, it was going to have the same kind of problems. So I was like, no, I really don't want to do that. I'd been in conversations with a lot of other institutions about the idea about extending collections and what could we do. And there seemed to be a lot of energy in the community for it at that time. So I thought, well, instead of trying to do this ugly kludge, let's see if we can get the collection extension stuff off the ground. And of course, we all know that did happen, and the work did happen, but much time passed. It took a lot longer than we originally thought it was going to take to do it, but we did get them in there. And the good news is that once collection extensions was in place, it was really easy for us to create agencies and divisions. And it was really easy for us to create groups of users who could only work in this agency or this division, and those were our depositors, managers, depositors, and viewers. They were so super simple to set up. And so it was easy for the users to collaborate, and it was easy for us to set up those groups. There were still some other customizations we had to do, but those were really kind of customizations we would have had to do anyway for our particular app. The major structural components were quite good. So yay, success.
Few more customizations that we think are interesting and might benefit other folks. And we might actually create it in a way or share the code that other people can use it. But based on the needs of our users, and we have had the system for a long time, we know how people want to find the publications or the releases. We customized the black light facets to add a date range filter. There is a date range gem that I think Blacklight has as an add-on, but it only has years. Our people are really particular about dates, so we customized the helper methods and added some custom JavaScript, and this is a bootstrap date range picker or something like that. Essentially modified some of the parameters in the query and then helper methods and whatnot to give the same kind of feel to the users as using any other facet. So you can query. This is essentially searching only for publications. We don't let people search for releases because there's too many of them. And we use some custom indexing to show people which publications have releases on which dates, so they can kind of add a date range or pick a date, whatnot. We did the same thing with the releases that are the child works. So when you are on a particular publication page and you have this nested list of releases, people can filter them by date. We have some dates in there, or they can also use a range. As I said, we used the date range picker, and the search builder classes have been really easy to work with and modify. So we used that to kind of add another parameters to the Solar query for the date range with some custom indexing in the publication indexer to add the date range in the format that Solar expects it. And then we can do the range on that. And same thing on the publication show page. We used another search builder there to find the release on a particular date. We had a poster here also that highlighted some of the UI changes, but one of the things I want to talk about was the forms. When we did initial user testing with the agency uploaders who essentially fill all these fields when they create publications and releases. Publications specifically have a lot of metadata fields in our case, around 15 or 16. Half of them are probably required. And it was obvious that the default form that came, there were lots of issues that people would skip certain fields and they wouldn't get good feedback on what they missed, what not. And our designer worked on initial prototypes and then ended up doing this step-through form using this jQuery Smart Wizard and actually a lot of custom JS validation. So now we have divided the form nicely into grouped metadata that makes sense to our users, and they can step back and forth and then get a good summary of all the metadata fields they have entered before submitting the form, and they can go back and forth between the tabs to figure out if they need to change anything before submitting. And they also get a good feedback on the right side on whether they have filled the required fields or not. The other customization that we did, this was partly came about based on some discussions we had last year with Princeton, ESMIS, Coles, and Trey. because they had similar experiences with working with Sufia, I believe, at that time, that they decided to store files outside of Fedora and point to the files to help with the migration process. And we knew that we had lots of files to upload. But we also had another use case that we knew that people hit our site really hard. There's a lot of requests as soon as a release is uploaded, I don't know, like Wednesday noon. 10 minutes before people like start hitting it really hard, we get tons of requests, and it actually even affects our system. So what we decided to do was use both this process to keep outside Fedora, but use S3 as a download point, that all these downloads don't have to go through the Rails app and add to this load, but S3 can take care of it. So we have static web hosting and CloudFront in front of the S3 bucket, and all the links on our site point to the S3. So all of S3 handles that load for us. As I mentioned, we did create an API. Part of the reason was to kind of throw some of this load that we have people who have written all kinds of clients and scrapers and whatnot, and they're constantly hitting our site trying to get the latest release and download all this information. So we created read API endpoints for metadata for agencies, publications, and releases, and also brought the links for the files in the API so people can get that information there. The read API uses mostly Active Fedora Solr service query to get all these Solr hits, and we kind of clean up some of the Solr stuff from there because our user base doesn't really understand all those things. So we get a cleaner output in the read API. For the write API, we somewhat modified the Hyrax works controller behavior that does the CRUD. We don't do all the CRUD there. We mainly focus on create and update methods. And we had to do some customization there because the agencies, their systems can't really provide us with this collection stuff. So they can either provide us with a parameter, and we have to figure out which agency it is or which division it is. So there's some logic there, or associating a release with a publication. But it's really basic there. We use JWT, JSON Web Token, for authentication. So it's separate from the device and stuff. It's a gem called Knock that throws a really lightweight implementation. And then for API documentation, we use Swagger UI. Some of you might have attended the Taco workshop that Justin and Christina did. And they did, I think they are also using Swagger for documentation and also for generating the server. And along this process, when we are developing this API, we realized that we could actually use the API, especially the write API, as a way to migrate all of this stuff from the old system to the new system. So John Ferreira wrote a client that uses the API, passes all this metadata and files, goes through the API, and we have successfully migrated more than 2,000 publications, 30,000 releases, more going on, and lots of files associated with that. This is just a screenshot of how the Swagger UI part of it looks like. You can actually, there's a link to the site if you want to explore that, but this is an easy way to document. But also it generates this HTML where you can interact with the API. So you can log in, get your token, and then interact with the API and do some stuff if you want to see what kind of information you get back from the system. This is a special need in our project that, as I said, the people are really interested in getting notifications through emails whenever they get a new release for a publication they're interested in. So we customized some of the views to add the subscribe button, and it uses the Mailgun API in the background that when you subscribe to a particular publication, you're essentially subscribing to a mailing list for that publication. And so whenever there's a new release, the release actor triggers a call to the API whenever there's a new release. And so that gets an email triggered to all the users, all the subscribers of that publication. I have kind of put some text here for some of the things we did to attain this feature. So we added a user attribute subscriptions attribute to the user class. It's an array of IDs essentially for the publications that they have. And then in the dashboard, we use the search builder again to show people what subscriptions they have. And then we use the API. The publication actor essentially creates a mailing list for each publication, and then people can subscribe to that. And then for the releases, we send the email whenever a new release is created. And then lastly, we want to talk about some of the performance improvements that we did in our system.
So the first performance we did was turn off Solar Suggest, which we are not the first ones to realize that we had Solar Suggest turned on. And you can see this is what our graph looked like before. I mean, after we got up to about 100, it just started going up. And it was just like, why in the world are we getting this graph? And of course, doing a little research, Adam Weed had already discovered this, and there was a issue in Active Fedora that now turns it off by default. But the only thing you have to do is just turn the suggest off. I went ahead and listed here the places you have to turn it off, because when we first turned it off, we only turned it off in the Solar config XML, and it looks like you also have to turn it off in the schema XML as well. And you can just search for suggest in those files, and it becomes pretty clear. I didn't put the code in of how to actually turn it off. But I think you can sort of look in that Active Fedora issue at the bottom, and it'll give you an idea of what you're looking for in those files to turn it off. So the next thing, though, is that we were definitely, if you've been at these meetings much at all, you will know that there are some issues with scalability when you have child works. Or this one is, yes, so there's two places you could do it. And this particular one is about child work. So our release that's in a publication, we have some publications that have thousands of releases, and the performance issue with that was causing us problems. And the crux of that is that when this is stored in Fedora, the way it is by default, this is ordered lists, and there's all sorts of extra information that's kept. And so it becomes inefficient. The parent knows about all of its children. That's the way it comes out of the box. So there was already some work done to reverse that relationship for collections to works. So we just looked at what was done in the PR that did that reversed relationship, and we basically copied that code and put it into our release. So the first change I had to make was to modify the release model, which is our child work, and put the membership direction the other way. So now all the members know about their parents. Now that wasn't all I had to do. So the way you access that relationship, if it's in the parent to child relationship, is with this in-works method. It comes in a couple different forms, but I'm just showing an example here that you could say release in-works IDs, and it'll tell you what publications it is. You can also, so now we're doing member of publications instead of the other way around. And so now the release is actually, when I say member of publications, I have a method that does the relationship in the other order. So the member knows about the parent. We also had to make some changes to a couple of other things. We added a search builder we added a search service that wraps the search builder, but basically we now have a Solar search that will go out and find all the members instead of having to go through Fedora to find it. So that was another performance improvement we did. And I just listed a couple of things here, like helper methods, indexers, release actors. There were just a couple of places where these relationships were being accessed, and so we had to make some modifications in each of those places. And I also wanted to point out about the release actor itself. So the release actor now has to actually add that relationship. So it's not coming automatically for me through the process that Hyrax set up. So I have to add my own member of a publication process. And there were a couple of publication changes I had to make too. We had some helper methods in there that were no longer needed, so I just yanked them out. And one of the other big changes we made, and this actually appeared to us later after we'd already reversed the relationship, we realized that, and this is a customization for us, we were indexing all of our release dates in the publication. So we were still going out and accessing all releases when a publication would get re-indexed. And originally, that did it with publications.members, which was very inefficient. And so our first attempt, I said, well, here it's active-fedora-base.where, and it's referencing it like it's a Solr field, so surely the active-fedora is using Solr. So yes, there's someone shaking their head because no, it doesn't. It still uses Fedora, but it oddly enough, so this is what our graph is. The blue line is if we don't do indexing at all. So if we don't go grab our dates and we don't do indexing, it's a nice flat line. But when we throw in indexing, originally it was the red line. But when I changed it to be the where, it turned into the green line. So it did get better. So it's clearly a more efficient process, but it's not flat. So Tahir actually found this and switched it over to be the Solr service query direct. And so now we know for sure we're only doing this by querying the Solr service. And so the before line is the orange and the after line is the blue. Now we get lots of spikes because there's all sorts of things that affect it. So I would just sort of ignore the spikes and see the real trend is that blue line is basically flat. So that was a real performance boost for us there.
Excellent. And lastly, I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about some of the plus deltas of working with Hyrax for the project specifically. Community, I think, is a huge plus. As I said, we reached out to multiple folks. Lynette has been working with the community for a long time. I've also been involved in these conferences and Slack and stuff. But as I said, we reached out to people when we talked about performance issues to Princeton and other people. The search builders, we mentioned multiple times, they have been great. We use them a lot. Indexers are really easy to do custom indexing. The module prepend, I think Justin did that work. We have been using that a lot to do some overrides, and it keeps our code base clean. And then we do like working with Rails in our shop. We are mostly a Rails shop there. Some of the things that we felt were kind of painful and difficult to work with, the actor stack, it's really complicated. This came up during some of the testing we did with background jobs. It seems like some of the jobs are not idempotent, and if they run multiple times, they create multiple duplicates and things like that. Same thing with fits, the characterization job. I feel like the way it is done right now is not efficient. Every time it spins up this fits JVM and then has to run a code and shut down and start and shut down. We are looking at options to use the fit servlet or maybe the whatever nailgun server there is. Indexing, it's interesting because I like indexers, but then there's this weird thing going on that every time you create a work, there seems to be like multiple calls to Solr, like 6 or 8 times in some cases in our situation. And Lynette looked at it to see if we can kind of make it more efficient, but I don't think we got anywhere with that. And then Active Fedora, we were talking about, we expect Solr, but it's not really a Solr object you're still getting. So I felt like that was kind of a weird thing going on, where we expect something, but it's not, especially when it's saying like it's a Solr service, but then you're getting a Fedora object out. So, but anyway, thank you. I think we are close to time here, but feel free to reach out to us if you want any more information on some of these customizations that we did. We did want to thank the community for having us here and sharing their pain points and customizations and whatnot to help us get the project to where we are. We are actually going to go live with the project in a few weeks, but we have provided a link for you here if you want to see it. So thank you so much.